On April 24, 1915, almost 250 Armenian intellectuals, writers, painters, artists, diplomats, politicians were rounded up, sent to the Haydar Pasha train station, and from there they were deported into the depths of the Ottoman Empire to Ayash and Çankara. The majority of them were killed. And that is the day that Armenians around the world, and hopefully the world, commemorate the start of what was the first genocide of the 20th century. Now, joining me in the studio is Professor Alan Whitehorn from the Royal Military College in Canada. He is an expert on genocide. He's written several books on the Armenian genocide. Professor Whitehorn, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
You are here in Armenia taking part in the centennial.
Yes.
This isn't your first trip to Armenia.
No, it's my 10th trip. The first one was in 2005, and usually almost every year in the spring I come here for about 4 or 5 weeks.
Let's talk a little bit about your background before we talk about the centennial and your feelings about that. You have Armenian heritage as well, so this is more than just clinical, academic, scholarly work for you. It's also very personal, I presume.
It is. On my mother's side, it's Armenian, and my grandmother, my Metzmama, was an orphan of the 1915 genocide, and she lost her entire family. She never knew her real name, her real age, and for over 10 years she lived in one refugee camp after another in the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, and then eventually in Greece, and finally was adopted by an Armenian family in Alexandria, Egypt.
And that's where she grew up?
That's where she went from being a teenager to a full adult and married, and that's where my mother and my aunt and my uncle were born.
You know, you're a professor of political science, and yet you've written many books about the Armenian genocide. Why was it so important for you?
Well, there was a personal odyssey, and I had wanted to learn more, so I began my research for personal reasons, trying to understand more this very complex and painful topic. But while I was doing research on the events of 1915, I was going through the archival records of the newspapers, particularly a major Toronto newspaper in Canada, for that entire year. So I looked at every newspaper, every day, every column for the entire year. And that was in the 1980s when I was a young assistant professor. And then about 10 years later, a Turkish consul from the Turkish embassy in Canada wrote to that same newspaper saying there had been no genocide. So I replied, quoting the headlines from the Toronto Globe of 1915. And from that point onwards, I was asked to do more and more articles, then books about the Armenian genocide. And I now have published 5 books on the Armenian genocide. 3 were poetry books. One was a combination with Lorne Shrinian of essays and poetry that was designed to help our members of parliament before they voted in favor of recognition of the Armenian genocide. And then most recently, for the last 3 years, I've been working on the first ever encyclopedia of the Armenian genocide, which is coming out in May.
In May, yeah, and I believe you have
a mock-up.
A mock-up of it.
Yes.
It's quite an extensive and monumental work that you've done here. How many years did this take of your life?
Well, it's 3 years officially. Unofficially, it's been many years in the making because of the background that you have to develop. But basically, 6 days and 6 nights a week for 3 years. My wife, I think, sometimes felt like a widow to this book, or this was the rival to her life with me.
Yeah, to your affections for her. Professor Whitehorn, this past month has seen a lot of interesting developments. You know, it is the 100th year. You know, I remember very clearly the 75th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, thinking that if something hadn't changed by the centennial, then hope would be lost. And yet, we are now at the 100th year, and there seems to be a lot of positive developments taking place. The European Parliament once again passed a resolution, a number of other parliaments, particularly in Europe, a number of US states, of course, not Barack Obama himself. I guess you can proudly say that the Canadian Parliament also passed a resolution.
Yes, and even earlier, and more recently, I think we have Germany and Austria, that were allies of the Ottoman Empire, recognizing the Armenian genocide, and Germany recognizing its role and responsibility in significant ways.
Because yesterday German President Joachim Gauck at an ecumenical service used the word genocide. Today, however, in the Bundestag, there was a resolution that was to be passed, but they have decided to postpone the vote on it. But certainly Germany and Austria coming to terms with their own involvement in this is quite monumental. And then Pope Francis's Holy Mass at the Vatican, you know, we were watching it being live streamed, and we were live streaming it here on CivilNet, and I think there wasn't an Armenian heart that wasn't beating a little faster watching that take place. The first time a world religious leader making that kind of statement was quite substantial.
Well, he's a remarkable pope, I think. He's very much willing to challenge past taboos, and ironically, this powerful papal figure is speaking truth to power, power meaning some of the secular governments that are reluctant for geopolitical and other perhaps commercial reasons to say the genocide word. But I think this pope is probably in my lifetime the most inspirational.
Yeah, certainly, and not only for the Armenian genocide, for all of his positions. You know, 100 years now, we're moving into the next century post-genocide. I've been asking all of our guests here at CivilNet, what's the path forward? You know, for 100 years, it's been a festering wound, and it's, you know, the last stage of genocide is denial, and 3, 4, 5 generations on, we're still having to deal with it. And, you know, there have been many moments here in our studio when we're preparing a video, or we're watching a video that we've prepared. There's been a lot of tears.
Exactly.
And it's something that we still can't get over. And yet there seems to be a shift in the narrative. You know, the genocide, you know, it created this collective consciousness of being a victim, but all of a sudden there seems to be something changing. What is your feeling on that?
Well, there are several things. One is, with the passage of time, it's like a ripple in the water thrown by a big, powerful stone. The first wave is much bigger than many later on. I think we're now 3 generations away from 1915 at least, sometimes more. And the people have a certain amount of distance. They've built new lives. They're often fluent in other languages. For example, the diaspora, the young are fluent in their home language. And so I think that makes a difference. The other thing is, in Turkish society, the official dogma is being penetrated and fragmented by, first of all, Turkish scholars and civil society activists, but also by the internet and the Turkish diaspora that enables those who wish in Turkey to learn more to learn the truth in a way that they haven't been able to learn as easily in the past. Even now, the Turkish school texts, as Taner Akçam, the fine scholar, has noted, is very skewed still, full of negative stereotypes about the Armenians, distortions. But the official textbooks of the Turkish schools may lag behind what is increasingly a cosmopolitan urban society that is aware. Now, how aware and how committed they are is another question. It's a little like in Canada, the United States, and Australia. We are aware more now about the Aboriginal treatment and problems, and many would say genocide, but many Canadians, for example, are not ready to go beyond that genocide word and engage in reparations.
Certainly there's acknowledgement, yet there hasn't been a full process that has taken place. You know, we've had this, or we continue to have this internal dialogue within, you know, Armenian communities, within our society. What is our responsibility in assisting those Turks today in Turkey who are, you know, standing up and saying yes, Our forefathers committed a genocide, and our government needs to recognize this so that we can move forward, so that we can have justice and the protection of human rights and democracy in Turkey.
Right.
As victims of genocide, are we responsible?
Well, Mahatma Gandhi offered, I think, some great insight and remarkable bravery, but also nonviolence. And his argument was we must resist injustice, we must resist the lies, but we have to do so in a way that opens our heart and talks to people rather than yelling at people. Because I think if we yell, and it's understandable why we might want to yell, we're angry and with good reason, but we want to open up a dialogue with the successor generations of the perpetrators. The people today did not commit these acts. Now, what they may do or not do, depending on our attitude and their attitude, is to continue the lies, right? So, or refuse to help in the reparations. So, but we can engage in a dialogue on those kinds of aspects, I think. But it's a challenge because you are profoundly moved by the suffering on the one hand, but you also have to realize what is the most effective way to move ahead. Because there is this huge mountain and a closed border between Turkey and Armenia. And when I come to the South Caucasus, I realize there is so much anger, so much national hatred of so many other peoples. And I usually offer this voice, it's almost a lonely voice. I say at the end of World War II, German statesmen and French statesmen had lots of reasons to be angry at each other. Mm-hmm. So many had died, so many had suffered, so much had been destroyed. But they began to talk about a different vision. Instead of French versus German, the idea of a European, a broader community. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's what the South Caucasus and the Near East needs. But that requires remarkable tolerance to overcome that suffering.
Well, on that note about remarkable tolerance, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much, Professor Whitehorn, for joining us, for coming to Yerevan, for all the work that you're doing for the Armenian genocide in the world of academia and through your poems and through all of your activism. So thank you very much.
My honor. Thank you.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was Professor Alan Whitehorn from the Royal Military College in Canada.